Hey folks, this week I talked with Joseph P. Veaugh-Geiss about KDE, their eco initiatives, and how all that ties in with the End-of-10. We get into the Stop Killing Games initiative, Pewdiepie, and a whole lot more. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is Floss Weekly, episode 840, recorded Tuesday, July the 8th. End-of-10, not just some guy in a van. Hey folks, it is time for Floss Weekly. That's a show about free, libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today we're going to talk about free and open software that is a replacement for some not free and not open software. It's going to be super interesting. I have with me Joseph P. Veaugh-Geiss. I took a stab at your name while we were doing the pre-show, and I feel like I did it better than. How do you pronounce your name?
It's Joseph Veaugh-Geiss.
Veaugh-Geiss. All right.
Yeah.
It sounds easy when you say it.
It's got a lot of letters.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. So, Joseph, tell me what you're involved with KDE, but also with this End-of-10 thing. What would you call your job description, sort of in the open source world?
So my job is a project and community manager. I work in a project that's funded by the German Environment Agency, called Opt-Green, which is within the KDE community. The project is focused on how free and open source software can influence hardware longevity. But it's within KDE, but it's also focused more broadly on how software licensing, how things like transparency, user autonomy can influence the how long you can use a device, basically, which is broadly relevant for all free and open source software communities.
Right. Oh, interesting. So I have this, what should I call it? And it irks me a lot. Various companies and organizations, they'll come out with some big green initiative. And sometimes you look into the details of it, and it's either very underwhelming or downright dishonest in some cases. So one of the ones that I remember reading about was some company came up with a new, essentially an alternative to PDF. And their big thing was, it's green because you can't print it. And everybody that really had a clue were just like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, because of course you can still print it. You might make your tools make it a little bit more difficult. I call it green. Sure. I call it greenwashing. And I'm kind of the opinion that most of the people that, let me put it this way, the vast majority of people care about the environment and want to do right by the environment and the earth. It's just, a lot of us are very jaded, and we think that a lot of these things that we read about are essentially, people may not know the term, but they essentially suspect that this is greenwashing, right? These are people that are trying to hitch their wagons to this cause, but they're trying to accomplish something else. And I think there might be a tendency for people to think that about open source. I think you have a point. I think there's something real here, but I want to dig into this sort of from that perspective of, these guys are just trying to jump on the bandwagon. Because I know there's got to be people that are thinking that. And so what's your take on that? Why is open source not greenwashing?
Yeah. So greenwashing means basically that you are presenting yourself as if you are helping the environment, but you are not actually doing anything to help the environment. And free and open source software is software that allows the user to continue to use software independent of the developers or the companies behind the software. And that has big implications for what that means for hardware use. That can be in terms of energy consumption. So you can take software that is licensed in a way that allows you to improve it and make it lighter, make it work on older hardware, make it consume less energy. Linux does this already without even thinking about it in terms of environmental issues or sustainability. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of lightweight Linux distributions that are designed for older hardware. And the reason that's possible is because the software license enables the derivative to then be modified in a way that works for that hardware. Mm-hmm. Every hardware that you keep in use has a huge benefit for the environment, in the sense that you don't replace it with a new one, and you don't have to dispose it in a treatment center in the best case. Which the production of a new device is accountable for a vast majority of the CO2 emissions of that device over its lifespan. There's a study from the German Environment Agency that estimated you would have to use a device for 30 to 80 years, assuming a 10% energy efficiency improvement every year to compensate for the environmental costs just in the manufacturing of that device.
Wow.
So to me, the End-of-10 campaign in particular, this Opt Green project from the Katie Eco Initiative, is raising awareness about the role that software plays in hardware longevity, and every device that does continue to be used is an actual win for at least reducing environmental harm. We've already made the harm by producing the device in the first place, but we can reduce it by not producing devices unnecessarily. So greenwashing, I think, is a real issue. I don't want to be involved in any greenwashing. I'm hoping that we are actually hopefully making a small dent, even if it's 1% of the users that may hear our message and say, oh, let me try Linux. That's already, when you scale it up to billions of devices, that's a lot of CO2 emissions that are hopefully avoided by keeping that device in use.
And, it's not just CO2 emissions, it's working machines that you can keep out of landfills, right? Like, that's sort of the other side of this is you hate seeing, from a computer like legacy use, you're retro hardware enthusiasts. You hate seeing this hardware go out into landfills, but from a more even practical standpoint, like there's a lot of still working computer hardware that just gets thrown away, or you take it somewhere to be recycled. You sort of hit on this a minute ago. You give it away. So, there's a box store in my town where I can take machines to, and they recycle it. They promise, they pinky swear that they recycle it. And then you go turn on the news and you find out that so much of this recycling stuff is just landfills in China. And that's not great either. I think nobody wants that, right? Nobody wants all this old junk to just be thrown away, particularly when it's still usable. That's one of the things.
E-waste is a real issue. It's the fastest growing waste stream for the past decade. Already in 2015, Achim Steiner, the director of the environmental program for the United Nations, described it as a tsunami of e-waste rolling out over the world. And at that time, I think it was 45 million metric tons of e-waste, which was estimated to be the material equivalent of 4,500 Eiffel Towers. Which those numbers mean nothing to me. I mean, they're big numbers. It's hard to understand what that means. There was a comparison made that it would be, if you stacked them up, it would be 170 times taller than Mount Everest, which is enormous just in terms of the height.
Right.
And it's only grown since then. So it's a 30% increase. I think by 2022, 60 million metric tons. And each year it's more and more. We just produce more and more devices and throw away more and more devices. This is the current state of digitization. And, the idea of functioning devices being thrown away, we don't think about it. So software support, security updates is maybe the most obvious way that we think about it, but it's also in terms of like software bloat. It's amazing to see a project like Haiku, which was developed in the 90s, and the 90s are still alive in Haiku. It's an amazing project,
right.
And you can run Haiku on devices that are very low powered, minimal specs, and it runs well. And it's a software issue. It's not a hardware issue. I wouldn't necessarily want to, give up all of the other things you can do with hardware today.
Right.
But we have a device that we use at some of our stands, which is from 2003, and it's very usable. You can still use it. You can browse the internet. You can watch videos on it. It's not unusable by any means.
Yeah, I remember seeing even demos of people taking things like I don't think it was Windows 95, maybe it was Windows 2000, one of the enterprise editions of Windows from that era, and it's like, look, this is how long it takes to boot up. You double click on something and it's there, it's ready to go. And then you go to even a high-end machine today. It's like, look, double click on something. Now it's ready to go. And just the disconnect, because our machines are objectively, multiple times faster now than they were then. Multiple cores more, the RAM is faster, the hard drives are faster, and yet the things we do with them, this is true on Linux too to some extent. I mean, this is not just a Windows problem. We need to be honest about that. It's just slower.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. The difference though is with Windows you can't do anything. With Linux you can.
Yeah. Yeah. What in your opinion, I'm not sure how much you have your hands on the actual development work, but do you have opinions on kind of what has led us to this state and what's broken internally that has led to things running slower than they should like this?
That's a good question. I am not a developer, so I don't have my finger on the pulse of the development scene. I suspect there's just watching the way the process has evolved. People develop on the hardware that's new, and it makes sense that you're going to use all that power that you have to develop software when you're working in like desktop spaces. If you're working in embedded spaces, it's a completely different story.
Yes, definitely.
And I think, the more powerful devices become, the easier it is to make software that's bloated, and you just don't notice it because the hardware can absorb all of that inefficiency. Whereas if we were coding on hardware that was old, you would probably see a very different world of software today. And I don't mean in terms of just functionality. I think a lot of functionality could be the same. It's just the way it's implemented could be very different. But I'm not a developer, and I'm not criticizing developers, and there's a lot of things I don't know about. So, but I can imagine that just the fact that you're developing on the newest devices will lead to software being more energy consuming and demanding.
Mashed Potato from our live chat says he loves how the Chrome/Ultrabook community are keeping old Chromebooks out of landfills by cracking the bootloaders to allow Linuxes to be installed. And that's sort of another angle that we can take on this, is the idea of devices that are locked down that make it very difficult for people to do this sort of homebrew work to keep them running.
Yeah, I think bootloaders should be, if the device isn't supported by the original vendors, the bootloader should be open. I think that should be a regulation. That I don't see why there's any reason to make devices become e-waste because the bootloader is locked.
Yeah. I am sort of philosophically very hesitant to suggest new regulation, let's say. But that is one of the ones that does seem, it seems like a good idea on the face of it, right? The idea of giving...
It's just hard for me... Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the idea of giving consumers more privacy seemed like a great idea too, and then we got cookie banners out of that. So like there are still ways for these good ideas to go wrong.
Sure. I mean, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, I think is... it's hard for me to justify why something like the bootloader would prevent the device from being used. It's hard for me to understand why that's a accepted state of things. Yeah. I mean, iPhones are the go-to example that I have. That these are good devices. The hardware is good. It's powerful devices that end up becoming useless because the bootloader is locked down.
Yeah. You could take so many of these devices and put Asahi on them and have, very capable little machines still.
Absolutely.
So there is at least one realm that there is something being done about this, and I'm not sure where we should start with this, but one of the other things you have your hands in is the End-of-10 campaign. Why don't you give us the background? So if you were in an elevator with someone who didn't know anything about this, how would you pitch this to them?
So the End-of-10 is trying to connect users of Windows 10 machines to in-person support to install Linux. And in particular, Windows 10 users that can't upgrade their devices to Windows 11. Mm-hmm. So that's the short version of it. The campaign started in November last year at the South Tyrol Free Software Conference with a BOF. It continued with a BOF at the Chaos Communication Congress, and then
a BOF?
A BOF, a Birds of a Feather meetup. It's like a like-minded individuals. You make a call to action, and people come. And people from the community came together. And from the beginning, the idea was to have a campaign that was not software specific, but rather about free and open source software in general. And that developed into this End-of-10 campaign, which is a community-driven project with various free and open source software communities. We have members from KDE, GNOME, Alma Linux, Debian, various communities around that who have come together and have made this website and collected information about where you can go to get in-person support. And that's either at a Linux user group or a repair cafe or a Linux cafe or an independent computer shop or a install event where you can go and someone will help you learn how to install Linux and get your device ready to continue to be used beyond the end of support in October this year.
Yeah, and
it's been great. Yeah.
What is the like? Because Microsoft is handing out Windows 11 licenses for free now if you have Windows 10, right? It's a free upgrade. What is the barrier here for people just continuing to run the next version of Microsoft Windows?
So there is a hardware requirement for Windows 11, which many Windows 10 devices do not meet. And it's related to the claims of a security implementation in the chip. The reason that it's questionable is that the cutoff for which chips are supported and which are not is relatively arbitrary. There are devices where it's not clear why they're not supported by Windows 11. The enabling of the benefits of these chips is not consistent. You would expect them to be enabled by default across Windows 11. They're not. This is creating estimated about 250 to 300 million devices that are going to lose security updates. There are ways to continue updating them for 1 year, but after that, you're in the same position as now. I
do some day job stuff, helping people with their Windows machines, and I've got a company right now that they've got a trio of machines that are doing what they need them to do, but for compliance reasons, they've got to go to Windows 11. And one of them, I think I can get it to upgrade, but it's going to be sort of a fight. So I have to update. It is not running with UEFI. It's running on a legacy Windows 10 install. I think it was installed first with 7 and then upgraded to 10. And so it does not have UEFI. And then it also didn't have the trusted platform module. It has a firmware TPM, but it wasn't turned on. So, I sat down to look at it the first time. It's like, oh, we just need to turn the FTPM on and it'll be happy. And, reboot it, turn it on, get back into Windows, run the command, the tool again, Microsoft's checker command. Nope, this machine is still not. Why? And get to looking at the documentation. Then, no, this motherboard should be supported. Come to find out, I'm going to have to migrate the thing from the old system partition to like an MBR. No, from MBR to I forget the term now, but migrate it from one device type to another device type. And Microsoft has a tool for this, but it's going to be a pain. I cannot imagine a regular person that does not do this sort of thing professionally stepping through that procedure to try to get a machine updated. It's a huge pain.
Is this procedure an officially supported procedure, or are you sort of hacking around the limitations?
I think it's officially supported. Like, it's an official Microsoft tool.
So you would probably be okay if you can get it to work. From what I understand, there are workarounds. You can make a Windows 11 unsupported device run Windows 11.
Hmm.
But I also, from what I understand, when there's a major upgrade, it may break and you have
Might
to do the
break
whole
again.
process again. Yeah.
Yeah, the
And it
tool
could be,
the tool in question is MBR2 GPT. So it's a
mm,
master boot record drive, and it needs to get changed to a GPT drive. And Microsoft has a tool to do this. It makes me. I'm going to do a full backup of the machine because messing around that much with the data on it makes me very nervous, especially given the kind of customer it is. But like
sure.
there is this sort of threading the needle path to get them there on one of their machines. But the other two, they're just going to be replaced as e-waste.
And so, what our message is now, we're not working with organizations, we're working with individuals.
Hmm.
Our target audience are individuals who have this problem. Is that you can maybe hack around, get someone to set up Windows 11,
Hmm.
or you can just get a solution that's probably going to solve most of your issues, meet most of your needs, and not have any of those problems, which is Linux. For many users, and it's not 100%. I know there's specific situations which would not be suitable to run Linux if you need a particular piece of software
Hmm.
that's not supported. But for many users, it is a viable option if they give it a try.
Yeah.
I know I've seen it in my family where I've converted some people to Linux after Windows 7 updates ended, and they've been using Linux since, and
Hmm.
it's really been fine. I've seen it in friends. So yeah,
Yeah.
the
So
goal is to meet those people and find those people.
yeah, absolutely. What is your and I know there's a lot of different distros kind of collaborating on this, but what is your preference? So if you've got somebody that's on one of these Windows 10 machines and they can't go to 11, what would you set them up with?
So I'm taking off my End-of-10 hat because the End-of-10 is a distro neutral uh, um, campaign. We don't recommend any particular distribution. Of course,
Right.
individuals can recommend whatever they want.
As an
Um,
individual, I'm sure is something gnome based, right?
so I'm actually so it depends on the hardware. For newer devices, I like Fedora with KDE Plasma.
Hmm.
I think it's a good, solid distribution. For slightly older devices, I might recommend Linux Mint with XFCE.
Okay.
Those are the two that I sort of go to, depending on how old the device, how much power the device has. Um,
Right.
yeah.
There was kind of this feeling in the community for the longest time that KDE was the power hungry and the bloated uh, desktop environment, and that's sort of been proven to be a myth recently. Or maybe the KDE devs did a lot of work on it. I'm not sure exactly which way that is. But I've not found that very recently, and in fact, I've seen some benchmarks that don't bear that out either. That KDE is basically as responsive on even older hardware as something like an XFCE is.
So, are you familiar with a Pine phone? Uh,
Y-
they had
Yeah,
their
reasonably familiar with it.
KDE,
Hmm.
exactly. So they had their KDE edition
Hmm.
Pine phone, and a lot of Plasma mobile work was done on that. And I think that had a big influence because Pine phones are very low powered devices, and the KDE community really was trying to get their software working smoothly on those devices.
Hmm.
And I think that's one factor. I think there's others, but that was one that was really had an influence on some of the yeah, slimming down of the software for these low power devices.
Yeah. Um, is there any? You said this is primarily a individual effort, but I've seen in the news and I've covered some of it as well. There have been some large organizations and even governmental organizations that have sort of announced that they are moving away from Windows and Microsoft Office to Linux and open source solutions. Do you see? Is this sort of connected? Are any of these things that we see in the news sort of feathers in the cap of the End-of-10 campaign, or is it just other people that are seeing the same problems and coming to the same conclusions?
I would like to think the End-of-10 campaign has had an influence. Many of those decisions were made before the End-of-10 campaign existed,
Hmm.
so I'm certain that it was people coming to the same conclusions. I think I was at a recent event at the German Environment Agency talking about green coding and sort of the state of things and looking to the future. And I was pleasantly surprised to see many people in positions related to the government were aware of the End-of-10 campaign.
Mm.
And I think if there is an influence that something like a campaign like this has, it's that it creates a different narrative amongst individual users, which then influences. I mean, organizations are just collectives of individuals, right? So if people are familiar with Linux, if they're familiar with the idea of Linux, and they're in a context in which people are discussing switching to Linux, it suddenly becomes a much more viable solution than a context in which it's only coming from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that we are contributing at least to the environment in which these solutions are seriously being discussed by the individuals in those organizations. But yeah, most of the things you're referring to, perhaps Schleswig-Holstein, they were already planning this years before. So this is not a direct outcome of our work.
Yeah, understood. From what I understand, the website, the End-of-10 website, actually has some instructions on how to do this. And one of the sort of criticisms that I've heard is that the DIY install section is very sparse. And is that on purpose?
That's absolutely on purpose. So we decided early on that we wanted to make the focus giving people in-person support. And the idea is that most average users of computers, the minute you ask them to hit, F2 and boot into the BIOS, you've lost them. Mm-hmm. For a vast majority of people, I think this is probably the case. You'd really have to be motivated to want to do that. And the idea is that there are people who maybe want to try Linux but aren't willing to go through that process. We want to find them and connect them with in-person support. But not having anything about DIY install also seemed that it was inappropriate because you can install it yourself.
Sure.
So the idea was we'll put at least the bare bones so that someone who's motivated can see, oh, this is possible. Maybe they haven't heard of this before. They'll see, and then we suggest to search for instructions. And the assumption is if they're motivated enough to install it themselves, they're motivated enough to also look for the many installation guides and videos online. And we're not going to be the one providing that. We'll stick with the in-person support, which is novel and something that we hopefully will excel at.
If you're going to be a Linux user, you need to get familiar with using Google to figure stuff out.
Exactly.
In fairness, I say that sarcastically. In fairness, that's true of any computer use, really. You either have to have an expert you can call on, or you need to be willing to figure out your own problems. That is not a Linux only thing.
That's also very true. And one thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of unofficial support that happens when everybody's using the same device or software. And people will say, oh, I don't know how to do this. And they can go to their friend or, partner or parent or, or a parent can go to the child. And they get this unofficial support directly. And with Linux, you generally can't do that because most people using Linux maybe are not in your circle of friends or in your family. And one of the things I do hope changes once we reach a critical mass is that becomes more common and more possible. That people can just say, oh, you use Linux. How do I do, this thing that I want to do?
Yeah. Are we sort of? It sounds like you're sort of taking the Linux user group approach then with the End-of-10, the way you're trying to make it happen on the local scale. Are we seeing a resurgence of the user group?
It's a good question. I don't know. I know that there is talk that some user groups have sort of been revitalized with some of the activity in this campaign. But I don't have any numbers on that, and that's more anecdotal than anything else.
Right. And this is another question from the chat room, has Pewdiepie had any influence on this? So I'm not sure if
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I have not watched the video, and I actually don't know who this person is other than what people have told me. So I'm relatively ignorant in that sense, but I do know about his de-Googleizing his life and videos posting about his process. I think that's huge, actually. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is the more Linux goes into the mainstream, the more there will be things like this, and that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever. I don't have any opinion about PewDiePie in particular, but
Yeah,
I
the
think these are.
weirdest take that I heard on this was there were some Linux people that their take was, oh no, it's Pewdiepie. He is, and insert your label here for however you want to label him and his followers. We're gonna get this huge influx of toxic people. It's gonna be terrible. The sky is falling. And I just had guys, there's no way that even the majority of the kids out there following this YouTuber, even if the YouTuber himself is a terrible person, which I don't know him, so I don't know. Even if he is, like, you're not going to get a huge influx of terrible people as a result. Welcome the new users. Help them out. Don't, it frustrated me to no end to see people have this take on it. It's like, oh, guys.
I mean, I guess there's two questions, right? There's what's the end goal, and how do you reach that end goal?
Mm-hmm.
And I think community is a big part of free and open source software, and I understand that there's a desire to protect that community, because it is a beautiful thing when you have these spaces where people who like to nerd out on these things can get together and do things. And I think that is a reasonable goal to have, and I think it's worthwhile protecting that and trying to find a way to preserve these spaces. There's another goal, which is I would like to see a digital society in which software is free software. Whoever is using it, I would like to be in that world. I think that would be a much preferable world to the one we're in right now, where software is exploitative and often antithetical to the needs of the user, or the desires of the users, and very much in favor of the people producing it. So I'd rather switch to that world, and that will come with, you're going to have all the people that maybe are coming from different places, good and bad. That'll be part of it too, and that's.
Yeah.
I think both are worthwhile. I absolutely don't want to downplay the importance of those spaces for people who have found community, and I think those are important places, and they've been important places in my life. So
I mean, it is reasonable to think about. I would agree with that. Are you familiar with the Stop Killing Games initiative? I believe that's out of the UK. And
I am familiar with it.
Do you see that as related?
So I don't know the details about it. From what I understood on a very high level, it's about the lack of continued support for gaming, for certain games. So I don't know how exactly. I'm not a gamer myself, but basically you can kill off the access to a game as a company, if I understood correctly, and that's absolutely related to End-of-10. It's the role that software plays in dependencies play in making something unusable.
Yeah,
and that can be at the hardware or the software level, or both.
I don't have any of them within reach. They're all on the other side of the room. I've got some retro Nintendo hardware, and so I see, in this case, the N64 is the thing that I can see. And those come with physical cartridges, and some of those are old now. I mean, I've got some games back there that are 20 years old at this point, and I can plug them into the console, and so long as the circuitry on the inside still works, turn it on and play the game. Nintendo has not the greatest track record for being friendly to its users and on the intellectual property front. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely.
And those games still work, but then you'll have a company that'll make a modern single player game that gets distributed over something like Steam, and it's single player, but it will require internet access. So it has to phone home to their servers to be able to continue playing it. And so when that company goes belly up, the game goes away. And nobody can play it, but also, like, there's no archive of it. It's just gone. And that's the thing that bothers me the most. And I think about this with in a lot of realms. It's not just gaming. I worry about YouTube. And I know this seems a little silly, but Google is not going to last forever as a company. YouTube is not going to last as a technology forever. And you then have to think, well, some of those videos that are on YouTube are historically significant, culturally significant. Thankfully, there are some groups out there like the Internet Archive and some others that are trying to find those important videos and archive them. But man, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of work that people have done that at some point is going to be lost. And I hate the fact that, particularly with gaming, because again, that's what we're talking about, I hate the fact that companies just have either not thought about that or they don't care. And those things are going to be lost, in some cases, lost forever. I mean, there's TV shows that are like this too, right? Like Doctor Who. Some of the early Doctor Who episodes, and this was before digitization was really a thing, so it wasn't as easy to do then. But there are some of those early Doctor Who episodes that were only on one copy of tape, and I think it was a fire broke out in one of the BBC archives, and those are just gone. I hate that. It irks me to no end. And so any of these things where people are putting their heads together and trying to figure out how do we preserve this for the future, I think is definitely worthwhile and something to think about.
Absolutely. So one of the things related to that, the project that started the KDE Eco Initiative was called the Veaugh-Geiss for FLOSS. It went from 2021 to 2023, and it's related to the Blue Angel Eco Label, which is the world's oldest eco label. It's the official eco label of the German government. And they released criteria for certifying software as environmentally friendly in 2020. And I thought of it now because one of the criteria, so they have these three main categories of criteria. Energy consumption transparency, so basically you have to measure and publish how much energy your software consumes. Support for hardware that's at least 5 years old, which is, in my opinion, too low, but that's the criteria they chose. And because, I mean, Linux supports hardware that's 20, 30 years old, so this is 5 just seems arbitrarily short. But and the user autonomy criteria, which was a list of criteria that was very compatible with free and open source software and concepts like open data, open formats, transparency in code. And one of them was you couldn't have any access control for your software that required connections to a server. It had to be able to work offline. And it had to be able to work without, having access to some sort of server for access control. And these games, from what I understand, fall into that category of if the distributor decides to stop that access remotely, your software won't run on your device locally, which has an environmental impact in the sense that that device running that software, suddenly the software doesn't work and that device can become useless.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous restriction. So
right,
and you bought it. It's yours. Like it's just kind of a weird.
Well, so that's one of the statements that people have made around this campaign. It's like if let's see, how does it go? If purchasing the game isn't ownership, then piracy isn't stealing. Right? It's
right.
It's that sort of thing. I also think about this a very similar problem with media ownership altogether. And so like the idea of buying an audiobook on someplace like Audible or buying a movie on Amazon Prime, not to pick on Amazon, they're just the big player in this space. It is not unheard of for Amazon to decide that a book or a movie or an audiobook is problematic for whatever reason. Suddenly the thing that it's talking about is no longer in the Vogue and maybe it's considered racist all of a sudden, or it's considered too dangerous on the left wing, whatever reason. I don't care about the details, but like there have been situations where people have purchased these things. And so therefore you have the idea that there's some ownership, and then Amazon turns around and says, we don't want to have anything to do with that. And then they stop even serving it on. And so like the thing that you had ownership on is just, it's gone. And that's kind of scary to me, like on a censorship level. I also think it's theft, personally. I wish the courts would see it that way.
Are you familiar with the example from the Amazon Kindle deleting 1984 by George Orwell from someone's device? I'm not kidding. This was a real example.
That's great.
The irony is just,
That's perfect. I'm not sure that there could be one much better than that. I think there was some conservative filmmaker made a film about fake news, and that also got deleted. And that one's sort of great in its own way. It's hilarious, but it's also really disturbing at the same time.
Yeah.
So I see in the notes that you sent me, to go in an entirely different direction, I see in the notes that you sent me that Ocular was the world's first eco-certified software, and you touched briefly on this, I think. What all is involved with that, and why is a PDF viewer considered eco-friendly? Does it not allow you to print things?
No, it does allow you to print things.
Good.
It's yeah. So the criteria for the Blue Angel, as I mentioned earlier, have these three main categories: energy consumption, transparency and energy consumption, support for older hardware, and the user autonomy. And the criteria. So we at KDE, we had this project, the Blue Angel for FLOSS. We were very attuned to how compatible the criteria were with free and open source software. It's worth pointing out you can be proprietary software and be eco-certified, but it requires fulfilling certain criteria and being compliant, which requires more steps if you're doing proprietary software. Yeah. Free and open source software, you kind of get it for free because you're already licensing your software in a way that enables user autonomy, allows, for example, turning off advertisements if there are advertisements in the first place, support for open data formats so that users can choose which software they want to use, which is also relevant if you're talking about energy consumption. Software consumes different amounts of energy, often to do the same thing. There was one study, again, from the German Environment Agency looking at text editors. They only identify them as proprietary and open source, but you can probably guess which
is which.
Which is which. And the proprietary one consumed 4 times the energy to do the exact same thing. And for an individual user, this is negligible. It's not, it's an individual energy consumption is not much. But when you scale that up to hundreds of millions, potentially billions of users, that difference is enormous. And data formats, if you restrict the data formats that you can use with that software, that also restricts the user's ability to switch software. Which also influences, for example, the overall energy consumption. When you have vendor lock-in, everyone needs to use that proprietary software program because the documents that are being edited only work on that program. Also has then an influence on how much the user has influence over their energy consumption and the devices they use. So Ocular is a PDF reader. We fulfilled the criteria. We measured the energy consumption, doing standard tasks that you would do, like opening a PDF, scrolling through the pages, highlighting text, making notes. We published the reports. You can go to the ocular.kde.org/eco page, and you can download the reports. You can see what was measured. Ocular runs, I gave the example earlier of a device from 2003 running Haiku. Haiku has ported Ocular to their device. You can use Ocular on a device that's from 2003. So it's 22 years old. It's much more than the 5-year limit that the Blue Angel requires. And then the various other criteria: support for open data formats, uninstallability is one of the criteria, that you're able to uninstall software. This seems obvious in the free and open source software world, but the minute you go into the proprietary world, suddenly you see all this bundled software that you can't remove. All of that consumes energy. All of that requires updates. All of that requires various aspects of hardware demands because you're bloating your software for that hardware. So by fulfilling all that, we were able to certify Ocular with this eco label. There are 2 other products that have now been certified. Nextcloud has certified their product, and a tool called the Green Metrics tool, which is a tool for measuring the energy consumption of software, is now certified.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to me that the things that you've described as being part of the keys to making these eco-certified, and we could use the term eco-friendly. It feels a little weird to say because that's just not the world that I work in most of the time, but to make eco-friendly software is just standard best practices and not being terrible to your consumers.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of handy that it works out that way. To make something that is eco-friendly, we're not asking companies to do something that is, objectively terrible in other ways. It's just write lighter software and give us a way to uninstall it and don't be terrible.
Yeah, right.
This is one of these areas where I think just about everybody can get on board, right? Are you based in the U.S.? Are you out of the U.S.? This is one of the things we normally ask, and I didn't even think to.
No, I'm based out of Germany.
Okay.
I live in Berlin.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this happens in Germany the same way that it does in the U.S. But you've got like people that are all in on environmental issues, and then you have another group of people that are extremely skeptical of some of those problems, right? And I talked briefly about greenwashing at the beginning. I think that's a big part of it. There are some of these issues that like just basically everybody can agree on, right? And one of those on sort of a more physical area is don't poison the drinking water, right? That is an environmental issue that everybody can agree on, right? We don't want, let's say, PFAS in drinking water. That's a bad thing. I think this idea of let's not waste cycles on our software is sort of in the computer science realm. It's the same thing. Like everybody that looks at that and really thinks about it should be able to agree that, okay, yes, this is an objectively good thing to make software that's lightweight as possible. I like it when we can come to, even people that have different viewpoints on some of these things, when we can come to agreement on, okay, this is a basic thing that we should all at least agree is a good idea.
Right. Whether we arrive there or not, it's we can agree that this makes sense.
Right. Well, and I think that's the other thing with all of these things. You're never going to perfectly arrive there. Right. No. So like you can look at what FFmpeg is doing. They go through and they hand code assembly because they don't do it. I'm sure some of them do them for environmental reasons, but they do it because they want to transcode video as fast as possible, and so they'll go into all of their functions and they'll look at the assembly and they will hand code assembly to make things run faster. That is an ongoing effort. I don't think FFmpeg is ever going to say we're done writing hand coded assembly. We've got all of the transcoding is perfect. It's all down to the minimum number of processor cycles, and that is an extreme example. You're never going to do that in LibreOffice or even Ocular. There's not enough benefit that you would get out of it for hand tuning every one of those functions. So like there's this kind of ideal target, and we all just have to sort of look at that and go, yes, that's the ideal. We're going to step as close to that as is practically possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's nice though when things align. I mean, I come from more of the privacy activism background. Mm-hmm. That's what got me into free and open source software initially, and has kept me with free and open source software, among many other things. Mm-hmm. And there are many ways that I've seen where there's a really nice alignment between some of the sustainability issues and some of the privacy issues. Mm-hmm. There are other areas where there are not alignment, and that's, sure. Then you have other values that you have to then evaluate as, what's important or not. But yeah, turning off JavaScript is a great way to
accomplish both of those things.
A lot of those. Yeah.
And as a hidden advantage, you no longer get Bitcoin mined on your machine while you're visiting websites, right?
Yeah.
All right. So you got to give a talk at the Chaos Computer Congress, and it was software licensing for a circular economy. What's FLOSS got to do with it? And I'm very curious about this because I'm not familiar with the term circular economy. And I would like to unpack that just a little bit in the bit of time we have left.
So you're familiar, I'm sure, with the 3 R's: reduce, reuse,
mm-hmm.
recycle.
Yes.
That's essentially a circular economy. It's
okay.
The idea of interrupting this linear produce, use, dispose mm-hmm. Approach to product life cycles, and interrupting that disposal stage and then prolonging the use stage, returning it to the beginning of the use stage, or recycling and bring it back into the produce stage. And that's the basic idea of the circular economy. And what I did in this talk, and I've since actually expanded on with a colleague working in data management at universities under the FAIR principles of data management, the findable, accessible, interoperable,
Mm-hmm.
and replicable data management for researchers, is the way that software licensing, like a free and open source software license, which gives a legal right to derivatives, and the FAIR guiding principles, which make data have long-term viability so that they can be used and reused later by other researchers, how that can then interrupt that disposal stage. So examples of this would be uh, so reducing the amount of e-waste we produce. So the example we gave earlier with smartphones, iPhones in particular, there's some projects that have taken smartphones and made them into home servers. And this is a really cool, way of taking this device and giving it a completely new life. And that's only possible when the software allows you to modify it and modify what the hardware is running so that you can then do things with it that were not thought of before at the production of that device.
Yeah.
Another example I give is recycling of software. We don't usually think of software as something that's recyclable, but when you take the example of Asahi Linux, that also came up earlier, they were able to do some really incredible work reverse engineering these M-series chips. But their work was then complemented by recycling the entire software stack that already existed, combining it with their work, and then giving you a fully functioning operating system on new hardware. And that's only possible when the software makes it possible for derivatives, for modification, et cetera. And so basically the idea is that proprietary software, you see that with Windows 10 end of life, potentially is just going to create a bunch of e-waste. That's the disposal stage. But you can take free and open source software and do all kinds of things with that software, keep that hardware in use in ways that were never intended initially by the producers. And so in that way, you've now created this reduce, reuse, recycle approach to digital technology.
Yeah, good
So
stuff.
that's sort of, yeah.
You were talking about data in sort of an academic setting, and I'm curious, does this sort of, I thought you were going to go a different direction. Does this apply though to like research data, where someone does a study and they come up with the data and you want to sort of package it, but maybe also license it in a way that the next time someone wants to look at something academically, scientifically, they can reuse that data and not have to go to the same effort to create essentially the same data set?
That's exactly what the FAIR guiding principles are there for. And the idea is that you want to make your data stored and released in a way that allows for someone to do that. And an example that is quite common is, you can recycle data for meta-analyses, where you take a number of studies that you did not do, someone else did, and the data is available, and then you have a way of looking at it and from a very high level across all of these studies, and then you can come up with new hypotheses based on the result of that research. Or you can take a look at data that was never intended to be looked at in a certain way, given the original research question, and then come up with new ways of looking at it, and then potentially base new studies on that. These kinds of things happen all the time in research, and it's important that data is available so that that's possible. What many people don't think about is that also means data can then be used on older hardware. This is to stick with that example. Interoperability means that you can then take that data format, if it's in a proprietary format. If you're using SPSS for your data analysis and it's saved in a format that's only readable by that, you're then constrained to devices that run SPSS to read that data. If you save it in a CSV file, which is readable by any computer, you can use any computer anywhere in the world. A researcher in some country that doesn't have the newest and most powerful devices available to them can still use that data in ways that might be new and innovative and have benefit.
I've seen some
before.
stories about this going badly in the other direction that some research group had, and I wish I could remember exactly what it is I'm thinking of. It almost seems like it was a geological survey or something like that. They had data that was in an old proprietary format, and like the only machines that could have read it died years ago. And so this was the story of someone trying to reverse engineer that data stream and be able to get it back to be able to use these saved records of, again, I think it was something to do with geological surveys. It's super fascinating though to see that that problem of sort of the past receding into the fog, and we no longer have access to it, and then people trying to go back there and mine it for useful things, whether it be, you know, legacy hardware that you want to run as retrocomputing, or try to resurrect these old programs through things like, you know, there's projects like DOSBox and Wine that'll let you run some of these old stuff, or, you know, this kind of thing where you're trying to get the data off of these old, you know, maybe 8-inch floppies that you're trying to resurrect and then figure out how the data was stored. I find it extremely fascinating. I think it really ties together with some of the things you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, totally. Very interesting stuff.
There is kind of an 800-pound gorilla in the room when we're talking about all of this that I have to ask you about, and I'm sorry. How does AI play into all of this? Is AI a force for good? Or, because, you know, we're talking about the idea of reusing hardware, and something that we really don't do very much of is reusing GPUs to do AI research. And, you know, it's sucking down, you know, more and more percentage, higher and higher percentage of the world's energy production. But on the other hand, people are beginning to do some very creative and interesting things with AI and LLMs. I'm curious your take on this.
So my take on it is LLMs, generative AI, I think there is utility there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not so sure what the utility is, but I'm also not heavily invested in finding what the utility is.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the way it's been sold and pushed onto the market, I'm not convinced is the most useful way to incorporate these tools into society. And I think there's plenty of room for skepticism about the benefits given the costs.
Mm-hmm.
And I lean more towards the costs are really high. They you know, we're opening up new nuclear reactors to power these very power hungry models, and I don't think it's worth it to, you know, make some image that's just, I don't know. I think we need to be more critical about what we're using it for, or to like answer your homework or write your proposal. And, you know, I had this experience. We have a season of KDE and KDE, and we had a number of submissions last year that were very clearly written by, you know, an LLM.
Right.
And were just very generic and not interesting, and then took my time to read them. And of course, someone made the joke, why don't you just feed it into the LLM and get a summary? And it's like, this is not the right utility. I'm not convinced that this is the way we should be using it. But I don't have an answer of like how that should be used at this point. I referenced this paper that I wrote about the data management and software licensing academic context. We put in there a fourth R, rethink, which is, you know, be judicial in how you use tools. And I think that's probably the best answer I can give right now is be judicial, think about what it is that's what it's costing to use these tools. What are the actual benefits? Are there drawbacks also for the user or for the individual? And trying to find that balance, I think, is what we're going to spend the next decades trying to figure out.
Yeah. I put it this way, that this is not the first tech bubble that we've been in. We are definitely in a tech bubble when it comes to AI. But as you look back throughout the past, whether that be, you know, the first desktops, the first home computers, the web originally, whenever the .com bubble. And there's been several others. As you look at those, each of them were bubbles. Each of them did eventually burst, but they also each changed the world. And I think AI is going to do the same thing. I think, you know, the world of 10 years ago doesn't exist and will never exist again because LLMs are here. But I very much agree with you that we have not figured out what they're useful for. They're kind of like the laser was when it was first invented, right? Like there's this cool new tool. All right, now what's the problem we're going to solve with it? And we're sort of in that same transition period with what LLMs can do. still figuring it out.
There was a nice keynote speaker last year at KDE's annual conference, Academy, David Schlangen, and he's a professor of computational linguistics. And I knew him from my studies in linguistics, and he basically tried to unpack that question, what are these tools good for? How can we incorporate them into our software in a way that is beneficial to users, to society? I don't know if it's online, but if people are listening and they want to search for it, maybe it is. It should be. It was recorded. David Schlangen, Academy 2024.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, we have about hit the hour mark. I want to ask, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to let folks know about? And I know this is a hard question to answer because you've got to do some set math in your head. Well, what did I want to talk about? What all have we talked about? But if there is anything, we can briefly get into it.
Nothing comes to mind. I would only, for the people listening, if you know of places that offer Linux support in your area and they're not in the End-of-10 campaign directory, let us know, reach out to them. We'd like to get the map as covered as possible. So if a user wants to try out Linux, they have an in-person support network around them.
The End-of-10 directory, is that worldwide?
It's worldwide. And we have places covering the map, and Europe is the most well covered. It makes sense. Most of us are based out of Europe, but places in India, places in North America, places in South America. So yeah, it would be nice to get a blue dot in every town.
Yeah. Every continent, maybe. I do. You had it in your notes, and I think this is something that maybe we should cover just real briefly. Do you do any vetting of these places, or is this just anyone that sends you an email, you gets added to the list?
Yeah, no, that is something I had in the notes, because we do not vet in any thorough way. We check that there's a website.
Okay.
We check that that it's run by an organization. We don't accept submissions from individuals. There are two reasons for that. One is the GDPR, which requires certain procedures for handling personally identifiable information. Which is only relevant for people. It's not relevant for organizations. We don't have any issues if we include organizations. And the other is that we don't want to vet every individual.
Just can't. It'd be impossible. Yeah. And if you tried, someone would be ticked off that you either decided this person's okay, this organization's okay, or that no, this person's not okay, this organization's not. You would inevitably have people mad at you.
Yeah. And we hope that by having an organization, at least gives some accountability through that organization. So as long as they have some sort of official,
it's not just a guy in a van.
Yeah.
But that is worth pointing out. So people do need to exercise, their own common sense in going to any of these. So that's the reason.
And I want to apologize if any of them are listening. We've had so many nice individuals reach out and say, "I want to help out." And we've had to turn them down. And it's really hard because they come with open hearts, with good intentions. And we have to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to, list you on the directory. But there are other ways you can get involved, and we try to give some tips. But yeah, that's unfortunately.
You need like a guide to point people to, here's how to make an official Linux user group that then can go on the directory.
We actually do have that. We have some information about how to start a repair cafe, how to get involved at the community center.
Excellent. All right, Joseph, thank you so much for being here. It's been absolutely a blast to talk to you and to look at this issue. And thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be here.
All right. And so that was Joseph P. De Veaugh-Geiss. I think I got it reasonably close. Talking about KDE Eco and the End-of-10, and absolutely had a lot of fun with that conversation. We don't yet have a guest for next week, so if you know of somebody that needs to be on the show, do let us know. You can send us an email, floss@hackaday.com, and that's where we do our scheduling at. Other than that, we appreciate that everyone that is here, those that watch and those that listen, those that get us live and on the download, and we will be back. We'll see you next week on Floss Weekly.